Okay, I've now watched part 2 of Get Back. Boy, it's long. It's very long. It's nearly 3 hours long. And there is so much to get your head around when you watch it. It's a real change of mood, I think, is the best way to describe it. Firstly, Michael Lindsay-Hogg is nowhere near as prominent in the second chunk as he was in the first. And I think when you watch it, you get the thing that Lindsay-Hogg felt he was in charge of everything during the Twickenham sessions because he was in his natural home of a film soundstage. Whereas when you get to the Apple studio, it's much more the band are in control, and Lindsay-Hogg is definitely sidestepped a little bit. And it's the band getting on with business. They've got Glyn Johns there doing all the mixing and recording. George Martin's on his shoulder keeping an eye on things. And while George Martin's never really been, thought of as the producer of Let It Be or the engineer or anything, he's there overseeing everything. So even though Glyn Johns is doing most of the stuff that George may have done in the past, George is very much still there overseeing things. And there's a nice little moment where they're talking about the fact that Johns had to go off to do another session in America. And George was very much, well, no, Glyn needs to stay on and finish this job first rather than getting someone else in. So, I think George Martin had a lot of respect for Glyn Johns and for the work he was brought in to do. Now, about the second chunk, the second film, well, the band definitely, you can tell they're pretty much getting there with all the songs now. And they're much more confident, they're getting on much better. George comes back. And then they bring in Billy Preston. Now, I didn't know that Billy Preston actually just popped in to visit them because he happened to be in the area. But in the first section, they mention him and they talk about him and they talk about whether they'd like to get him in to do some stuff. And they mentioned Nicky Hopkins as well, but I think Billy was who they wanted. So whether a message got called out to Billy that they wanted to use him, but he happened to be in the area because he was doing some TV shows. And as soon as he came in to meet them, he's there behind the piano, laying down some great licks, as we all know that he did on that album. There's a few running gags in the film that's quite good because John got asked to film a link to go into the Stones Rock and Roll Circus, which they filmed a few months earlier. And he keeps doing that link as like a gag, which is quite funny. It's quite amusing that they always start the day with tea and toast. It's very much like people going to work, really. They go in there, they have their tea and toast, and they get on with the work in hand, and then they go home at sort of tea time. And again, all this talk about, Yoko was there and she was in the way, that's just not true. It really isn't not true. In fact, as you watch the film, you kind of forget she's there. And I think that's probably how the band works. They probably thought, yeah, John's there, he's with his new wife, and they just want to get on. Although, actually, were they married at that point? No, they weren't. I don't think they were married at that point, but anyway, it doesn't matter. They were just there, that's what was happening. And actually, Paul makes this great point, I think, in the first film, where he sort of, it's been in the trailer as well, where he basically says, I don't have a problem, John's happy, and, and he says this line, in 50 years' time, will people be talking about the fact that the Beatles split up because Yoko sat on an amp? And that has been the story of the Beatles for the last 50 years. It was all Yoko's fault, they split up, blah, blah, blah. But the fact is they are talking about breaking up as they're making this. Not in a, what do we do now? It almost feels like it was like a definite plan. And, they were going to do this. And I really think they probably thought the Beatles was going to end when the 60s ends. Because, they could see they couldn't just carry on just churning stuff out. So I think, and that's the great thing about the Beatles is, and, I'm going to quote Dave Hepworth on this, is that the Beatles are the perfect story of a band because they had a beginning, they had a middle, and they had a definite end. And they had an untarnished body of work. And that is absolutely the story of the Beatles. And there's some people that talk about. David Quantock was talking about it on Twitter, saying, "Oh, it was just the Beatles' worst album with a load of outtakes." I mean, that's just not what this album is. I bought this T-shirt, this Let It Be T-shirt, in San Francisco in 2001 in a music shop that had T-shirts for all the Beatles albums. I wanted Let It Be because it was my favourite Beatles album then. It's still my favourite Beatles album. It'll always be my favourite Beatles album. And I've been fascinated with this film all my life. And just to see what has been done now is absolutely extraordinary. And when they did bits of songs that obviously made the original Let It Be film, like Dig It, for example, Jackson's not used the bit that was in the Let It Be. Pretty much, I would say, from what I remember, because I haven't watched Let It Be all the way through for quite a while, although I'm quite tempted to watch it once I've watched the third part, I would say there's no more than 5 or 6 minutes of stuff that was in Let It Be that's in this new film. Because literally everything is new material. I mean, there's the odd bit, like when the famous line from John Lennon where he says, "I dig a pony with Charles Hawtrey with the deaf aids," that's in there. But there again, I'm trying to remember if that was actually in the film or just on the album. I can't honestly remember. But most of what's in this is not in the Let It Be film at all. And again, when you think they were working in the basement of an office, I mean, I don't know if they had much lighting in there or not, but everything's well lit. And again, like in the first film, Jackson's managed to use bits of audio where they weren't running the cameras and fit it in with some, cutaway shots and whatever. There's a little bit of continuity that I didn't like. There's a bit where they're playing and Billy Preston's playing keyboards, but then you see Billy Preston walk in and start dancing, and then they cut to a shot of him playing keyboards. I kind of didn't like that. I'd rather have just seen a long shot of Billy Preston dancing and then a shot of the band afterwards. But, that's just me. I mean, no one else is going to care. And anyway, as the film goes on, there's a bit where they discuss how they're going to go up on the roof. And then they actually climb on the roof and they're wandering around and stuff. And why none of that was ever in the Let It Be film, I have no idea. And my theory, and this is just my opinion, is that I think Lindsay-Hogg, when they got into Apple, Lindsay-Hogg felt a bit sidestepped by all of this. And so I think he actually deliberately wanted to make the Beatles' Let It Be film not very good. I mean, I know the original edit of Let It Be was about 2 and a bit hours and they cut it down to 82 minutes. But I don't know, it makes, because there's so much good stuff in this thing and so much joy and so much happiness. And I mean, John and Paul are really like that. And I think when George comes back, then all of them are like that gang of brothers again. There's no, you can just see the way they interact between each other. They are that band. And maybe when they had that second meeting at George's house, maybe they did discuss the fact that we're going to do this, then maybe we'll do another album, and then that'll be it. That's my theory about what happened at that conversation. And that's why when they came back into Apple, things were a lot better. Now, what other things really got me on it? I think that it's just that candidness, I think, that's so great. As I said, Lindsay-Hogg's kind of out the way a bit on this chunk. I mean, maybe at the time he was poking his nose in here and there, but that hasn't made it to the edit, which is good. But I don't think he was, because I don't think there was a lot he could do, because when you're in a fairly confined space playing music, he can't suddenly then decide to change the backgrounds or, put coloured lights in or whatever. But there's a couple of other nice bits, like they bring in a Leslie speaker for George to play through, because he wants to play the guitar through a Leslie, which I think he probably got that idea from working on the Badge song with Cream, because of course there's a Leslie guitar on that, and that may well have been played by George actually rather than Eric. But anyway, George wanted the Leslie speaker, and that certainly adds to the palette of sounds on the film and on the album, of course. And then they also bring in a laptop pedal steel guitar thing, which John obviously plays on For You Blue, and I think it gets used on a couple of other bits. But no, they're definitely, you know, gelling much more as a band, and everything stripped back. And I think by about the third or fourth day of being in Apple, they're doing what the Beatles wanted to do when they set out to do it. There's another bit where Lindsay-Hogg had bugged the canteen and recorded a conversation between John and Paul. Now, I kind of think that was a bit out of order, to be honest, because I think even though it does make it interesting, and they don't really say anything particularly controversial, I think that kind of underhandedness is not very good. I mean, if that sort of thing happened now with a filmmaker, I mean, he would just get, you know, Lindsay-Hogg would just get sacked and probably go to court. But then again, I mean, people bug people all the time now and leave their phones recording and stuff. But, you know, I didn't like that. But yeah, anyway, you know, it's a long haul, this second half, and it, like the first half, but even more so, I think you need to watch it 2 or 3 times to really take it, you know, take everything all in. And it's interesting because, you know, Mal Evans, he's there all the time, and he really is like the Beatles gopher. And yeah, it's quite funny really, because I suppose once they stopped touring, he didn't really have a job, so, you know, they just send him out. Like, you know, George sent him out to get a bow tie, and then they went out to get other bits of gear and stuff. But yeah. Anyway, I think that's just a few observations from me. If you can hear that beep behind me, that's my oven telling me my tea's ready. I will be back tomorrow or maybe Sunday with my little take on what I thought about part 3, and, you know, just a general overview of what I can remember, because there's so much to take in. Anyway, hope you enjoyed this little chat. If you do, please like and subscribe, and I'll be back with the third part of this, and probably another video coming on something completely different, but not that.